The inn sat where 3 roads met, like the fingers of some buried giant's hand, reaching up through the earth. One road led north to Winterfell and the wall beyond. Another ran south to King's Landing and the warm kingdoms of the Reach and Dawn. The third stretched east toward the Vale of Arryn and the Mountains of the Moon. For as long as anyone could remember, there had been an inn at this crossing. The stones were old, the timber was older, and Masha Heddle, who kept the place now, was oldest of all. Well, perhaps not oldest, but old enough that her hands shook when she poured the wine, and her daughter Willow did most of the heavy work these days. Willow was a sturdy girl of 20, with her mother's brown hair and her father's practical manner. Her father had been a hedge knight who stopped at the inn one winter and never left. He died when Willow was 12, kicked by a horse in the stable. She remembered him teaching her to read the faces of travellers, which ones would pay, which ones might cause trouble, which ones were running from something. The morning started like any other morning in the inn at the Crossroads. Willow swept the common room while her mother prepared the porridge and bacon. The smell of wood smoke and cooking fat filled the air. Outside, the autumn sun was climbing over the eastern hills, painting the sky the colour of a fading bruise. It would be a clear day, good for travel. The first guests were already awake. A wool merchant from Maidenpool sat near the fire, warming his hands and complaining about bandits on the road. 2 knights in service to some minor riverlord ate their breakfast in silence, their shields propped against the wall. A septon, travelling south to the capital, sat alone in the corner, moving his lips in silent prayer over his bowl. Normal people on normal journeys, the kind of guests who paid their copper pennies and caused no trouble. But something felt different this morning. Willow couldn't say what exactly. Maybe it was the way the merchant kept glancing at the door. Maybe it was how quiet the nights were. Or maybe it was just the season turning. Autumn always made people nervous. Winter was coming, as the Starks liked to say, and everyone knew what that meant. Lean times, hard times, times when the roads became dangerous, and the strong took from the weak. Her mother noticed it too. Masha Heddle had been keeping this inn for 30 years. She knew the rhythms of the road, like a sailor knows the tides. And lately, the rhythm had been changing. "More soldiers," she muttered to Willow as they worked together in the kitchen. Every day, more soldiers on the road. It was true. Over the past few weeks, the traffic had shifted. Fewer merchants, fewer common travellers. More men in mail and leather, riding in groups, wearing the colours of great houses. Lions of Lannister heading north, the twin towers of Frey going south. Once, a company of mounted knights in the blue and red of Riverrun had stopped for ale and bread, then ridden west without saying where they were going or why. Something was happening in the realm. You didn't need to be a maester to see it. The old king, Robert Baratheon, was still on the Iron Throne, but rumours floated up and down the kingsroad like dandelion seeds on the wind. The king's hand, Jon Arryn, had died suddenly. Poisoned, some said, though others claimed it was a fever. Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell had come south to take his place. That meant changes. Changes at the top always meant trouble below. Willow didn't care much about kings and hands and high lords. They lived in their castles and fought their wars and made their grand plans, and people like her just tried to survive in between. But she cared about the inn, This was her home, her life. And when trouble came to the Seven Kingdoms, it always found its way to the Crossroads eventually. By midday, a new group arrived. Willow heard them before she saw them. The sound of horses, the jingle of tack and armor. She stepped outside and counted 12 riders, all men, all armed. They wore a mix of colours and badges, sellswords probably, or hedge knights looking for employment. Their leader was a big man, with a black beard and a scar across his nose. He swung down from his horse and looked at the inn like he was measuring it for value. "Food and ale," he said. Not a request, a statement. Willow nodded. "Stable your horses around back. I'll bring it out." They paid, at least. That was something. Some groups just took what they wanted and dared you to complain. But these men had coin, and they weren't shy about spending it. They ate beef and bread, and drank 3 barrels of ale between them, growing louder and rougher as the afternoon wore on. One of them grabbed Willow's arm when she brought more bread. She pulled away sharply, and her mother appeared with a wooden spoon in hand, giving the man a look that could freeze a river. He let go and laughed, but there was no humour in it. This was the new normal at the inn. Every few days, another group like this. Men with weapons and no lord to answer to. The kind of men who appeared when the bonds of law started to fray. Her father had told her once that you could tell how healthy a kingdom was by counting the broken men on the roads. In good times, there were few. In bad times, they multiplied like rats in a granary. The black-bearded men left before sunset, heading south toward the capital. Willow watched them go and felt relieved. But her relief didn't last long. As the sun dipped below the western hills, another rider appeared on the northern road. This one was different. He rode alone. He wore fine clothes under a travelling cloak, and his horse was a good one, well fed and carefully groomed. A rich man's horse. He had a sharp, clever face and mismatched eyes, one green and one black. Willow had never seen eyes like that before. They made her uncomfortable, like he could see through walls and into your thoughts. He dismounted and approached the door of the inn. He was small, she realized, shorter than her by half a head, with bowed legs and a rolling walk. But there was something about him that commanded attention anyway. Maybe it was the quality of his clothes. Maybe it was the way he moved, careful and deliberate, like a man who knew that people wanted to hurt him and had learned to stay ready. "A room," he said. His voice was cultured, educated. "And whatever you're serving for supper." "We have mutton stew and fresh bread," Willow said. "The room is 4 coppers." He paid with silver, which meant change to make. While Willow's mother counted out the copper pennies, the small man surveyed the common room. The wool merchant was gone. The knights were gone. The septon remained, and a few new travellers had arrived. A farmer and his son heading to market. A tired woman who might have been a midwife or a wise woman, and a young couple who looked newly married, sitting close together and sharing a bowl of stew. The small man chose a seat near the fire, but not too close. He sat with his back to the wall where he could see both the door and the stairs. A careful man, a man who expected danger. Willow brought him his stew and a cup of wine. He thanked her politely. He had good manners, she noticed, better than most nobles who stopped here and treated her like furniture. He ate slowly, savouring each bite, and when she refilled his wine, he asked her about the road north. "Is the kingsroad clear?" he said. "Any trouble between here and Winterfell?" "There's always trouble somewhere," Willow said carefully. "But I haven't heard of any bandits close by. The merchant from Maidenpool complained about robbers near the Trident, but he complains about everything." The small man smiled. It was a strange smile, sad and knowing at the same time. Merchants do tend to complain. It's part of their charm. He didn't say where he was going or why, and Willow didn't ask. People came to the Crossroads for all kinds of reasons, and most of them preferred not to share. That was fine by her. The less she knew about her guests, the safer she was. But she couldn't help wondering about this one. His clothes marked him as nobility, or at least wealth. His manner suggested education. And those eyes, those unsettling, mismatched eyes. She had the feeling she'd seen his face before, maybe on a coin or in a story. But she couldn't place it. Night fell. The common room grew quiet. The farmer and his son went to bed. The young couple disappeared upstairs, giggling. The midwife dozed by the fire. The septon continued his prayers, endless and whispered. The small man sat alone at his table, drinking wine and staring into the flames as if searching for answers there. Then the door opened. Cold air rushed in, and with it came a woman. She was tall and thin, dressed in riding leathers and a heavy cloak. Her face was drawn and pale, her eyes red from lack of sleep or crying, or both. She looked like a woman who had ridden hard and far and still had farther to go. Behind her came 4 armed men, clearly her guards, all wearing tunks marked with a grey direwolf on a white field. Willow's breath caught. She knew that sigil. Everyone knew that sigil. House Stark of Winterfell. The woman scanned the common room with sharp, desperate eyes. Her gaze passed over the septon, the sleeping midwife, the empty tables. Then it landed on the small man by the fire, and everything stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other across the space between them. The woman's hand went to something at her belt. A dagger, Willow realized. The small man's eyes widened, but he didn't reach for a weapon. He just sat very still, like a rabbit hoping the wolf might pass by. "You," the woman said. Her voice was cold and hard as winter ice. The small man stood slowly. "Lady Stark," he said, "this is unexpected." Lady Stark, Catelyn Stark, wife of Lord Eddard Stark, the new hand of the king. Willow had never seen her before, but everyone knew the Starks ruled the north from Winterfell. What was she doing here, so far from home, with only 4 guards? "Unexpected," Lady Stark repeated. Her laugh was bitter. "Yes, I imagine it is. For both of us." She crossed the room in 3 long strides. Her guards followed, hands on their swords. The small man backed against the wall, his clever face suddenly looking very young and very afraid. "Lady Stark, please," he said. "Whatever you think." "I think you tried to murder my son," she said. "I think a man with a dagger came in the night to kill Bran while he lay helpless in his bed. I think that dagger was Valyrian steel with a dragonbone hilt, and I think it belonged to you." The words hit the common room like stones dropped in still water. Murder. A boy. Valyrian steel. Suddenly, everyone was awake and watching. The septon had stopped praying. The midwife sat up by the fire. Even the young couple peered down from the top of the stairs. Willow stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. Her mother clutched her arm, fingernails digging into flesh. This was bad. This was the kind of trouble that got people killed. The kind of trouble that burned inns to the ground. The small man raised his hands, palms out, showing he was unarmed. My lady, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with any attack on your son. I don't even know what you're talking about. I've been in King's Landing, and before that—" "You lie," she said. "The dagger was yours. Littlefinger himself told me." Something flickered across the small man's face. Surprise, understanding, and then, strangely, resignation. "Littlefinger," he said quietly. "Of course." Lady Stark turned to the room. Her voice rang out clear and commanding. "I am Catelyn Stark of Winterfell. I speak for my husband, Lord Eddard Stark, Hand of the King. This man is Tyrion Lannister of Casterly Rock. He tried to murder my son. I demand that he be seized and held for the king's justice." For a moment, no one moved. Tyrion Lannister. The name meant something. Even Willow knew it. The Lannisters were the richest family in the Seven Kingdoms. They said Tywin Lannister was the real power behind King Robert's throne. And this small, clever man was his son. Lady Stark's guards drew their swords. But 4 men wouldn't be enough if someone in the room decided to defend the Lannister, and there were always people willing to help a Lannister. Their gold was good. "Please," Lady Stark said, looking around at the faces in the common room. "I know some of you. Curliket, you served my father, Lord Hoster. Willis Wood, you fought beside my brother Edmure at the stone mill. I am asking you to do your duty. Help me take this man." Silence. Willow held her breath. Her mother's fingernails dug deeper. Then the Septon stood. He was an old man, thin and bent, but his voice was steady. "I will stand with you, my lady. The gods witness your truth." One of the men at a back table rose next, then another. They weren't knights or soldiers, just common men. But they knew the name Stark, and they knew the Starks were honourable, and that meant something in a world where honour was rare. Tyrion Lannister looked at each of them in turn. He didn't try to run. He didn't beg. He just sighed deeply, like a man who'd always known this moment was coming, and had finally stopped being surprised by it. "Well," he said, "this has been an interesting evening." They bound his hands with rope. They took his purse and his cloak. They searched him for weapons, and found none. Through it all, he stayed calm, almost amused, as if this were happening to someone else, and he was merely observing. Lady Stark stood before him. "You will be taken to Winterfell," she said. "There you will answer for your crimes." "I've committed no crimes, my lady," Tyrion said, "but I doubt that matters now." They led him outside to the horses. Willow watched through the window as they tied him to a saddle. Lady Stark and her men mounted quickly, urgently, like people who knew they needed to be far from here before dawn. The men who had helped seize Tyrion lingered in the yard, unsure what to do, now that the moment had passed. Then they were gone. The sound of hoofbeats faded north along the kingsroad, swallowed by the darkness. Willow turned to her mother. Masha Heddle's face was white as fresh milk. "We should have stopped them," her mother whispered. "We should have stayed out of it." "How?" Willow said. "How do you stop a lady of a great house?" Her mother shook her head. "The Lannisters will hear of this. They'll want to know who helped. They'll want names." Willow felt ice settle in her stomach. Her mother was right. When Tywin Lannister learned his son had been seized at this inn, he would send men, and those men would ask questions, and people who gave the wrong answers, or even the right ones, would suffer for it. The common room was empty now. The Septon had gone to his bed. The midwife had disappeared. The young couple was gone. Even the farmer and his son had slipped away, wanting no part of what had just happened. Willow and her mother cleaned the dishes in silence. They banked the fire. They locked the door. But neither of them slept that night. They sat in the kitchen, listening to the wind in the eaves and waiting for the sound of horses that might mean soldiers coming to ask why a Lannister had been seized under their roof. The inn at the Crossroads had seen many things over the years. It had sheltered lords and beggars, knights and thieves, holy men and murderers. It had stood through wars and winters and the rise and fall of kings. But Willow had the feeling that tonight something had changed. Tonight, the great game of thrones had reached down and touched their small, simple life. And once that game noticed you, she thought, it never looked away. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Or maybe it was just the wind. Willow couldn't tell any more. She thought about the small man with the mismatched eyes. He had been polite to her. He had eaten his stew and drunk his wine and paid with silver. He hadn't seemed like a man who would murder a child. But then, what did a murderer look like? Her father had always said that evil wore many faces, and the most dangerous ones looked just like everyone else. Still, something about it didn't feel right. The way Lady Stark had said Littlefinger's name, the way Tyrion had reacted to it, like he'd suddenly understood something, like he'd been caught in a trap he hadn't even known was there. But it wasn't Willow's place to wonder about such things. She was just an innkeeper's daughter. She poured the ale and swept the floors and tried to survive. That was all she could do. Dawn came eventually. The sun rose red over the eastern hills. Willow stepped outside to check the yard and saw something that made her stop. Hoofprints. Dozens of them. The ground was torn up from all the horses that had come and gone in the night. In the mud near the stable, someone had dropped a coin. Willow picked it up. Gold. A golden dragon with the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen stamped on one side and King Robert's crowned stag on the other. She closed her fist around it. This single coin was worth more than the inn maid in a month. She should give it to her mother. They could use it to buy supplies, repair the roof, maybe even hire help. But instead, she threw it as hard as she could. It spun through the air and disappeared into the weeds beyond the yard. She didn't want Lannister gold. She didn't want any part of what had happened here. She just wanted things to go back to normal. Travellers and traders and common folk passing through. Quiet days, safe days. But as she stood there in the dawn light, looking at the torn-up ground and the empty road, she knew those days were gone. The storm was coming, and the inn at the Crossroads was right in its path. 3 days passed before the first Lannister soldiers arrived. Willow was in the yard, feeding the chickens, when she heard them coming. The sound rolled down the kingsroad from the south like distant thunder. Hoofbeats. Many horses moving fast. She dropped the bucket of grain and ran inside. "Mother," she said, "soldiers, coming from King's Landing." Masha Heddle was kneading bread dough, her gnarled hands working the flour and water with practiced rhythm. She didn't stop. She didn't even look up. But her shoulders stiffened, and Willow saw her lips move in what might have been a prayer. "How many?" her mother asked. Willow went to the window. The riders were visible now, a column of mounted men in crimson cloaks and lion-crested helms. The morning sun flashed off their armour, 20 of them at least, maybe more. Too many, Willow said. Her mother wiped her hands on her apron and straightened her back. Then we serve them like any other guests. We keep our mouths shut and our eyes down. We know nothing. We saw nothing. Do you understand me, girl? Willow nodded. Her mouth was dry. The soldiers clattered into the yard in a cloud of dust and the smell of horse sweat and leather. Their leader was a knight, tall and broad-shouldered, with a hard face and cold eyes. He wore a surcoat showing the golden lion of Lannister over his mail. When he dismounted, his boots hit the ground like hammer blows. Masha Heddle met him at the door. She curtsied low, the way you did for high-born lords. "Welcome to the inn, sir. Will you be wanting food and drink?" The knight looked past her into the common room. "I want information," he said. 3 nights ago, a man stopped here. A small man, clever-looking, dressed well. He would have had mismatched eyes. "We have many travellers, sir," Masha said carefully. "I can't recall." "Don't lie to me, woman." The knight's voice was quiet, but there was iron in it. "Tyrion Lannister was seen entering this inn. He never left. A day later, riders bearing Stark colours were spotted on the kingsroad heading north. Now Lord Tyrion is missing, and Lord Tywin wants him found. So I'll ask you again. Was he here?" Willow watched from the kitchen doorway. Her mother's face was pale, but her voice stayed steady. "Yes, sir. He was here. He took a room and had supper. But I don't know what happened after that. I'm just an innkeeper. I don't involve myself in the affairs of great lords." The knight stepped closer. "You're lying. Witnesses say Lady Catelyn Stark was here. They say she accused Lord Tyrion of crimes and took him prisoner. They say common men helped her seize him. Were you one of those common men?" "No, sir. I swear it. I stayed in the kitchen. I saw nothing." "Then you're either blind or stupid." He turned to his men. "Search the inn. Every room, every corner. If anyone helped the Starks, I want their names." The soldiers pushed past Masha Heddle like she wasn't there. They tore through the common room, overturning tables and benches. They kicked open doors upstairs. Willow heard crashes and curses as they searched the guest rooms. One man came into the kitchen and started pulling open cupboards, scattering pots and bowls across the floor. "Please, sir," Masha said to the knight, "we're just simple folk. We have nothing to do with the quarrels of great houses." "Your inn sits at the Crossroads," the knight said. "Everyone has something to do with everything here. That's the problem with Crossroads. Nothing passes through clean." He walked through the common room, examining everything with those cold eyes. He stopped at the table where Tyrion had sat. Someone had cleaned it, but the knight ran his finger along the wood as if he could still feel the presence of the missing man. "Who else was here that night?" he demanded. Masha hesitated. Willow could see her mother calculating. If she gave names, those people might suffer. If she didn't, she and Willow might suffer instead. "There was a septon," Masha said finally. "Travelling to King's Landing, a wool merchant from Maidenpool, a midwife, a young couple, a farmer and his son. Just travellers, sir. Common folk." "Names," the knight said. "I don't know their names. Most travellers don't give them." The knight grabbed Masha by the arm, not violently, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. "Listen to me, old woman. Lord Tywin Lannister is not a patient man. His son has been taken by his enemies. Every hour that passes makes him angrier. You don't want to be the one who kept information from him. So think very carefully. Did anyone here help Catelyn Stark seize Lord Tyrion?" Willow saw her mother's throat work as she swallowed. "The Septon," she whispered. "He stood with her, and some men at the back tables. I think one was called Curliket. He said he served House Tully." The knight released her. "There. That wasn't so hard, was it?" He called to his men. "We ride north, find this Septon and this Curliket. I want them brought to Casterly Rock in chains." They left as quickly as they came, thundering back onto the kingsroad in a column of crimson and gold. The dust settled slowly. The chickens came out from under the stable where they'd been hiding. Everything was quiet again. Marcia Heddle stood in the doorway, staring at the empty road. Tears ran down her weathered face. "I gave them names," she said. "The gods forgive me. I gave them names." Willow put her arms around her mother. "You had to. They would have hurt us." "That Septon was a good man. He stood up for what he thought was right, and I just sent soldiers after him. What does that make me?" "Alive," Willow said. "It makes us alive." But even as she said it, she felt sick. This was what war did. It made good people betray each other just to survive. It turned neighbors into informants and innkeepers into collaborators. And the worst part was knowing it would only get worse. The soldiers were just the beginning. Over the next weeks, the Kingsroad became a river of armed men flowing north and south. Lannister soldiers rode in groups of 10 or 20, all searching for something. Sometimes they stopped at the inn. Sometimes they just passed by, their crimson cloaks bright as blood against the autumn landscape. But it wasn't just Lannisters. Riders wearing the blue and red of House Tully came through, heading north toward Riverrun. Men in the colours of minor riverlords moved in small companies, their faces grim and purposeful. Even a few northern soldiers appeared, riding shaggy horses and wearing furs, despite the fact that autumn was barely turning. Something was happening. The whole realm was shifting like a landslide, and the inn sat right at the edge watching rocks begin to fall. Travellers brought news, and each new piece fit into a picture that grew darker every day. King Robert had been killed in a hunting accident. No, not an accident, some said. Murder. The Lannisters had done it. Or maybe the Starks. Or maybe it was just bad luck and too much wine. No one knew for certain. Joffrey Baratheon sat the Iron Throne now, a boy of 13, with his mother Cersei Lannister whispering in his ear. One of his first acts as king was to order the execution of Lord Eddard Stark. They said he'd confessed to treason. They said he'd tried to steal the throne. They said a lot of things, and none of it made sense to Willow. But what did make sense was this. The North was rising. Robb Stark, the young lord of Winterfell, had called his banners. The Riverlords were joining him. They are marching south to free Lord Eddard or avenge him, depending on which story you believed. And that meant war. War had come to the Seven Kingdoms. The traffic through the inn changed. Merchants stopped travelling. The roads became too dangerous. Only armed men moved now, and they moved with purpose. Some heading north to join Robb Stark, others heading south to fight for King Joffrey. The Crossroads became a dividing line, a place where men chose which side they would die for. Willow learned to recognize the signs. She could tell which soldiers were eager for battle, and which ones were just scared boys trying to look brave. She could spot deserters before they even dismounted, the way their eyes darted around, looking for pursuit. She learned when to smile and when to disappear into the kitchen, when to pour drinks and when to water the wine, small skills that might keep her alive. Her mother grew thinner and quieter. The bread she baked wasn't as good anymore. Sometimes Willow found her standing at the window, staring at the road, her lips moving in silent conversation with ghosts only she could see. One evening in late autumn, a group of men arrived wearing no colours at all. They were hedge knights and sellswords, the kind of men who fought for whoever paid them. Their leader was the same black-bearded man who'd stopped before, back when the world still made sense. He recognized Willow and grinned. "Still here, girl. I thought smart people would have run by now." "Where would we run to?" Willow asked. He laughed. "Fair point. The whole kingdom's gone mad. Might as well stay home and watch the madness come to you." They drank heavily that night. One of them had a lute, and played songs about battles and brave knights and beautiful maidens. The songs were old and familiar, but they sounded wrong somehow, like singing about sunshine while standing in the rain. The black-bearded man called Willow over when she brought more ale. He was drunk enough to be talkative, but not so drunk he couldn't count his coin. "You know what the problem is," he said. "The problem is the great lords think this is their war. They think they're fighting for honor and justice, and who gets to sit in a fancy chair in King's Landing. But it's not their war. It's our war, the little people's war. We're the ones who'll bleed and die while they argue about crowns." "Which side are you on?" Willow asked. He shrugged. "Whichever one pays better. That's the only honest answer. These lords, they'll tell you pretty stories about loyalty and duty. But in the end, they're all the same. They want power, and they'll sacrifice anyone to get it. So why should I care which one wins?" "Maybe because some of them are better than others," Willow said. "Maybe," the man said, "but probably not. Power corrupts, girl. Remember that. The best of them start out wanting to do good, but the throne changes people. It makes monsters of men and men of monsters. You mark my words. Whoever wins this war will all lose." He was wrong, Willow thought. He had to be wrong. The Starks were different. Everyone said so. They were honorable. They kept their word. They protected their people. But then she remembered Lady Catelyn seizing Tyrion Lannister. Had that been honorable? Had that been just? Or had it just been another lord playing the game and not caring who got crushed beneath the wheels? The sellswords left in the morning, heading west toward the Trident. They said that's where the real fighting would be, where Robb Stark's northern army would meet the Lannister forces. A battle was coming. Maybe the battle that would decide everything. Willow stood in the yard and watched them go. The sun was hidden behind grey clouds. Rain was coming. She could smell it on the wind. A rider appeared on the southern road. Just one man, riding fast, his horse lathered with sweat. He wore the crimson of House Lannister, but his cloak was torn, and his face was bloody. He pulled up in front of the inn and half fell from his saddle. Willow ran to help him, and he grabbed her shoulder to steady himself. "Water," he gasped. "Please." She brought him water, and he drank like a man dying of thirst. When he finished, he wiped his mouth and looked at her with wild eyes. "Which way is Casterly Rock?" he asked. "West and south," Willow said, "but that's weeks of riding from here." "I have to warn them," the man said. "I have to tell Lord Tywin, the Stark boy, he's not just marching south, he's winning. He caught Sir Jaime's army at the Whispering Wood, surrounded them, slaughtered them, took the Kingslayer himself prisoner. Willow felt the world tilt. Jaime Lannister was the greatest knight in the realm. If he'd been captured, if his army had been destroyed, that meant the war's not going the way they thought, the soldier said. He laughed, a brittle sound on the edge of madness. The lion has teeth, but the wolf has hunger, and hunger always wins. He stumbled back to his horse and somehow managed to climb into the saddle. Then he was gone, riding west, carrying his terrible news to anyone who would listen. That night, more soldiers came. These wore the colours of House Frey, the twin towers on a grey field. The Freys were river lords, but everyone knew they played both sides. Their castle, the Twins, sat astride the green fork of the Trident. Anyone wanting to cross the river had to pass through Frey lands and pay Frey tolls. The Frey soldiers were laughing when they arrived, telling jokes and swapping stories like men without a care. They demanded the best food and the best wine, and paid with copper that looked like it had been shaved down to weigh less than proper coin. Willow served them silently. She heard fragments of their conversation, something about a wedding, about an alliance, about how Lord Walder Frey was the cleverest man in the Riverlands because he waited to see which side would win before choosing. "That's not clever," one of the younger soldiers said. "That's just cowardly." An older man cuffed him on the ear. "Clever and coward mean the same thing when you're still alive at the end. Remember that, boy." They left before dawn, heading north. Willow watched them go and wondered what they were really doing. Everyone knew the Freys couldn't be trusted. Lord Walder had too many sons and too many ambitions. He'd support whoever gave him the most in return. Winter was coming closer now. The leaves were falling from the trees. The nights were cold enough to see your breath. And still the soldiers came, wave after wave, turning the kingsroad into a highway of war. Willow started keeping count. 20 soldiers one day, 30 the next, sometimes more, sometimes less. But always men with weapons, always men moving toward violence. One morning, her mother didn't get out of bed. "I'm tired," Masha said when Willow came to check on her. "Just so tired, child. Let me rest a while." But Willow could see it wasn't ordinary tiredness. Her mother's face was grey, her breathing shallow. Something was wrong inside, something that had been breaking slowly for weeks and had finally cracked. "I'll get a master," Willow said. "No maesters," her mother whispered. "They're all at the war now, and we can't afford their fees anyway. Then I'll get a midwife or a healer, someone. Just stay with me, girl. That's all I need." So Willow stayed. She sat beside her mother's bed and held her hand and listened to the sound of horses on the road outside. The inn still needed tending, so she went down to serve the guests when she had to. But mostly, she stayed upstairs, watching her mother fade like a candle burning down to nothing. 3 days later, Marcia Heddle died. She went quietly, in her sleep, without pain or struggle. One moment she was breathing, the next she wasn't. It was so peaceful that Willow almost didn't notice at first. She buried her mother behind the inn, near where her father lay. There was no septon to say the words, so Willow said them herself. Half-remembered prayers from childhood mixed with things she made up as she went. She didn't think the gods cared about the difference. When it was done, she stood over the grave and realized she was alone now, truly alone. The last person who cared whether she lived or died was in the ground. But the inn was still here, and people still needed food and beds, so she wiped her tears, went inside, and started baking bread. The next morning, a northern soldier stopped for breakfast. He was young, maybe 17, with a serious face and a grey direwolf on his cloak. He ate his porridge slowly and watched Willow with careful eyes. "You're alone here?" he asked. "Yes," Willow said. "That's dangerous. These roads aren't safe for anyone, but especially not for a woman alone." "I can take care of myself," the soldier nodded. "I believe you. But belief doesn't stop a knife. Lord Robb Stark is gathering all the northern forces at the Twins. We're going to march south and take King's Landing, free Lord Eddard, make the Lannisters pay for what they've done. When we come back this way, things will be better. You'll be safe then." Willow looked at his young face and his earnest eyes, and didn't have the heart to tell him that she'd heard promises like that before. That soldiers always said things would be better after the war. That nobody ever mentioned what happened to the people who got crushed in between. "I hope you're right," she said instead. He smiled and left 3 copper pennies on the table, more than the meal cost, a kindness from a boy who probably had very little copper to spare. Willow stood at the door and watched him ride north. The sky was grey and heavy with coming snow, the first snow of winter. It would fall soon, covering everything in white, hiding the blood and the mud and the ashes. But before the snow came, there would be more war, more soldiers, more suffering, and the inn at the Crossroads would see it all. Because that's what Crossroads did. They stood at the centre while the world tore itself apart around them, and they survived by serving whoever came through the door. That was her life now. Pour the ale, sweep the floor. Don't ask questions, don't take sides, just survive. But as she closed the door and turned back to the empty common room, Willow couldn't shake the feeling that survival might not be enough anymore. That something was coming that would test her in ways she couldn't imagine. The roads filled with lions and wolves and all the beasts of war. And she was just one woman standing at the crossroads, watching the great game play out. She thought about the soldier's words. "When we come back this way, things will be better." She hoped he was right, but she didn't believe it. The first time Willow saw Beric Dondarrion, he looked like something out of a song. It was early winter, the kind of cold grey morning when your breath hung in the air and the frost crunched under your boots. She was splitting wood behind the inn when she heard them coming. Not the usual thunder of soldiers, but something lighter, purposeful. She straightened up and saw them rounding the bend in the road. 20 men on horseback, riding in formation. Their leader wore a bright yellow cloak that blazed against the dull landscape like a banner of flame. He sat tall in his saddle, young and handsome, with long dark hair and a face that belonged on a knight from the old stories. The kind of face that made you believe in honor and justice and all the things the songs promised. Behind him rode a mix of knights and common soldiers. Willow recognized some of the sigils. House Dondarrion's purple lightning bolt on black. The 3 dogs of House Clegane. A few others she didn't know. But they all looked fresh and ready, like men riding out on a great adventure instead of toward the brutal reality of war. They stopped at the inn. The young lord dismounted with easy grace and approached Willow with a smile that could have melted the frost. "Good morning, mistress. Might we trouble you for breakfast? We have coin and will pay fair." Willow nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look. Dirty clothes, rough hands, hair coming loose from its braid. Nothing like the fine ladies this lord was probably used to. "I can make porridge and bacon," she said. "Fresh bread if you can wait." "We can wait. We're in no rush to meet what's ahead of us." There was something in the way he said it, a hint of shadows behind the bright smile. But then it was gone, and he was calling to his men to stable the horses and stretch their legs. Inside the common room, Willow worked quickly. She'd learned to cook for large groups since her mother died. It was that, or starve. She fried bacon until the fat popped and sizzled. She boiled water for porridge and sliced yesterday's bread into thick slabs. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling, and that was all soldiers really wanted. The men talked while they ate. Willow listened from the kitchen, picking up pieces of conversation the way she'd learned to do. Information was currency now. Knowing things could save your life. "The mountain is burning everything west of the God's Eye," one man said. "Villages, farms, even the Smallfolk who have nothing. He's leaving a wasteland behind him." "That's what Lord Tywin ordered," another replied. "Burn the riverlands until Robb Stark has nothing to eat. Make the river lords regret supporting a northern king." "It's not war. It's butchery." "War is butchery. The only question is how honest you are about it." Lord Dondarrion's voice cut through the discussion. "That's why we're riding west. King Robert gave me a command before he died. Hunt down Gregor Clegane. Bring him to justice. That mission hasn't changed just because Robert is dead." "The king is Joffrey now," someone said carefully. "The king is a boy who listens to his mother," Dondarrion said. "And his mother protects the mountain because he's useful. But I swore an oath to Robert Baratheon, and I'll keep it, even if it costs me everything." Willow brought more bread to the table. She could feel the tension in the room. These men knew they were riding toward something terrible. The mountain that rides was famous throughout the realm, 7 feet tall and strong as an ox, cruel beyond measure. He'd been burning and killing since the war started, and no one had been able to stop him. One of the men noticed Willow and smiled. He was older than the Lord, with a weathered face and kind eyes. A small man, compact and sturdy, dressed in simple leather armor. "Thank you, mistress. This is fine food. What's your name?" "Willow, sir." "I'm Thoros," he said. "Not a sir, though. I'm a priest. Red Priest of R'hllor, if you know what that is." Willow had heard of red priests, strange men from across the narrow sea who worshipped fire and talked about prophecies. She'd never seen one before. "You don't look like a priest," she said. Thoros laughed. "I get that a lot. Most priests don't carry swords or ride to war. But my God believes in action, not just prayer. And right now, the Lord of Light wants Gregor Clegane stopped. Can you stop him?" The laughter faded from Thoros's face. "We'll try. That's all any man can do. Try and hope the gods are listening." They finished their breakfast and paid with silver. Lord Dondarrion pressed an extra coin into Willow's hand. "For your kindness," he said, "and for your courage. Not many people are brave enough to keep an inn open during war. The Crossroads needs places like this, where men can rest and remember they're human before they go back to being animals." Then they were mounting up, adjusting weapons and checking saddles. Lord Dondarrion's yellow cloak caught the weak winter sunlight as he climbed onto his horse. He looked down at Willow one last time. "If we come back this way, I'll tell you a story about how we caught the mountain and brought him to justice." "I hope you do, my lord." "So do I." They rode west, following the road towards the God's Eye and the burning lands beyond. Willow watched them go until they were just distant shapes on the horizon. Something about them made her sad. They looked so noble and sure, like heroes from the songs. And she'd lived long enough now to know what happened to heroes. They didn't come back. Not the way they'd left. Winter deepened. Snow fell in thick white curtains that covered the roads and made travel nearly impossible. The inn saw fewer guests now, just occasional soldiers and desperate refugees fleeing the fighting in the west. Each one brought darker news than the last. The Riverlands were burning. Gregor Clegane and his men were slaughtering everyone in their path. Whole villages disappeared overnight. The few survivors who made it to the Crossroads told stories that kept Willow awake at night. Stories of children thrown down wells, women raped and murdered, men tortured for information they didn't have. And the war itself was spreading like a plague. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself the rightful king and was gathering forces at Dragonstone. Renly Baratheon, Robert's youngest brother, had claimed the throne too and was marching north from Highgarden with an enormous army. The realm had gone from 1 king to 4 in the space of a season. Willow stopped trying to understand it. She just focused on survival. Keep the fire burning, keep the food cooking, stay alive one more day. Then, on a bitter cold afternoon in the dead of winter, they came back. She was drawing water from the well when she heard horses. Not many, maybe 6 or 7. She looked up and saw them emerging from the snow like ghosts. They weren't the same men who'd left. These riders were hard and worn, their clothes patched and stained, their faces hidden behind scarves against the cold. But she recognized the yellow cloak, torn and dirty now, but still bright enough to stand out against the white landscape. Lord Dondarrion dismounted stiffly, like a man with old wounds that never healed right. When he pulled down the scarf covering his face, Willow gasped. The left side of his face was a ruin of burned flesh. The skin was red and twisted, pulling his eye into a permanent squint. His ear was gone completely. And when he moved, she could see he favoured his left side, like his ribs hurt with every breath. "Mistress Willow," he said. His voice was rough now, damaged by smoke or screaming. "Still here, still surviving. That's good." "My lord," Willow managed. "What happened to you?" "The mountain happened. We found him at a village called Mummer's Ford. He was burning it. We tried to stop him." Dondarrion laughed, but there was no humour in it. "We failed. Most of my men died. I should have died too. But Thoros brought me back." The Red Priest appeared behind Dondarrion. He looked older somehow, though it had only been a few months. His eyes were haunted. "Can we rest here?" Thoros asked. "Just for the night. We'll pay." "Of course," Willow said. "Come inside. All of you." There were 7 of them now. Lord Dondarrion, Thoros, 5 others, all hard-faced men who looked like they'd been to the 7 hells and barely made it back. They moved slowly, carefully, like people who expected violence at any moment. Inside, Willow built up the fire and started cooking. She had rabbit stew, saved from yesterday, and she threw in extra vegetables and barley to stretch it further. While it heated, she watched the men settle into the common room. They didn't talk much. They just sat close to the fire, warming their hands and staring at the flames. One of them was crying silently, tears running down his scarred face. Another kept touching a wound on his arm, checking to make sure it was still bandaged. These weren't the confident warriors who'd ridden out to catch the mountain. These were broken men. Survivors of something terrible who hadn't quite figured out how to keep living yet. Dondarrion found Willow in the kitchen. "I'm sorry," he said. "We're not good company right now." "You don't have to be anything," Willow said. "Just rest, eat, get warm. That's kind of you." He paused, staring at nothing. "We found villages full of dead people, children nailed to barn doors, old women with their throats cut. The mountain doesn't just kill. He makes people suffer first. He enjoys it." "Did you catch him?" "No. He's too strong, too well protected. Every time we get close, he slips away. But we're not giving up. We can't. Someone has to stand against him. Someone has to show that justice still means something." Willow wanted to tell him that justice was dead, that the only things that mattered now were strength and cunning and the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. But she looked at his burned face and his determined eyes and couldn't bring herself to say it. "What will you do now?" she asked instead. "Keep hunting. The mountain is just one man, but there are others like him. Lannister soldiers who think they can burn and rape and murder without consequences. We'll find them. We'll stop them, one at a time if we have to." "7 of you against an army?" "We'll find more men. There are always people willing to fight for something that matters. And if there aren't, then we'll fight anyway, because someone has to." They stayed 2 days. During that time, 3 more men joined them. Refugees from burned villages who had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. They heard about Lord Dondarrion and his mission, and decided it was better to die fighting than to die running. Willow saw how it worked. Dondarrion gave them purpose, a reason to keep going. He told them they were fighting for justice, for the Smallfolk, for a world where men like the mountain couldn't do whatever they wanted, and they believed him because they needed to believe something. On the morning they left, Thoros found Willow alone. "You should leave this place," he said. "Close the inn. Go somewhere safer." "There is nowhere safer. The war is everywhere." "Then at least be careful. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Much worse." "How do you know?" Thoros looked at her with those haunted eyes. "Because I've seen it. In the flames, in my dreams. The Lord of Light shows me things sometimes, visions of what's coming, and what's coming is darkness." He left before she could ask what he meant. The men rode out heading west again, back into the burning lands. Willow stood in the doorway and watched them go. 7 men had become 10. By the time they came back, if they came back, there might be 20. Or none at all. The snow kept falling. Spring came late and grudging, more like a brief pause in winter than a true season. The roads turned to mud, making travel even harder. But still the soldiers came, and still the refugees fled. And still Willow stood at the crossroads, serving whoever needed food and shelter. Then one evening, a different kind of group arrived. She heard them singing before she saw them. Rough voices raised in an old song about a bear and a maiden fair. The sound was incongruous in the grim landscape, almost offensive in its cheerfulness. But there it was. They came around the bend in the road, maybe 15 of them. A mix of soldiers and common folk, armed with everything from proper swords to farming tools. And in the middle of them, Willow saw the yellow cloak. Lord Dondarrion had returned. But he was different now. The burned side of his face had healed somewhat, leaving thick scars that pulled at his skin. His hair was longer, tied back with a leather cord, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something wild and uncompromising. The men with him were different too. They didn't look like soldiers anymore. They looked like bandits, outlaws, dangerous men who'd been pushed beyond the edge of civilization and had learned to thrive there. "Mistress Willow," Dondarrion said, "still here, still surviving." "Still here," she agreed. "You brought more men. These are the Brotherhood without banners. That's what they're calling us now. Men who fight for justice without asking permission from lords or kings. We take what we need and give to those who need it more. We protect the Smallfolk. We punish the wicked." One of the men laughed. "We're bandits with a cause, is what we are." "Better than bandits without one," another said. They crowded into the common room, filling it with noise and movement. They had money, surprisingly, silver, and even some gold. They paid well for food and drink, and they ate like men who didn't know when their next meal might come. Willow served them and listened to their stories. They'd been raiding Lannister supply trains, ambushing patrols, freeing prisoners, hanging war criminals from trees as warnings to others. They moved through the riverlands like smoke, appearing and disappearing, impossible to catch or predict. "We hanged 3 Lannister soldiers last week," one man said proudly. "Caught them burning a farm, made them dig their own graves first. Let the farmers watch. Justice." "Justice," the others echoed. Willow wasn't sure it was justice. It sounded more like revenge. But she kept her thoughts to herself and kept pouring the ale. Thoros sat apart from the others, drinking alone. Willow brought him bread and noticed he was staring at his cup like it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Are you well, Thoros?" He looked up. His face was thinner now, his eyes deeper in their sockets. "I brought him back 6 times now. 6 times he died, and 6 times I prayed, and 6 times the Lord of Light sent him back. But each time it's harder. Each time he comes back a little less human and a little more something else." "Sent who back?" "Beric. Lord Dondarrion. The first time was at Mummer's Ford. The mountain sword went right through him. He was dead. I was so angry. I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed before. And suddenly he was breathing again. The wound closed. He stood up. I thought it was a miracle. Now I'm not so sure." "Why not?" "Because miracles are supposed to make things better. But every time Beric dies and comes back, he loses something. Memories, feelings, the things that made him human. He's becoming a tool of the god instead of a man. And I'm the one doing it to him." Willow didn't know what to say to that. Magic and gods and resurrections were beyond her understanding. She dealt in practical things, food, shelter, survival. But she could see Thoros was suffering, so she poured him more wine and left him alone with his guilt. The Brotherhood stayed 3 days. In that time, more men found them. A blacksmith's apprentice whose master had been killed. A farmer whose land had been burned. A former soldier who deserted the Lannister army and was looking for redemption. They all joined the Brotherhood, swearing oaths to Lord Dondarrion and his cause. On the last night, there was a trial. They'd captured 2 men on the road, Lannister soldiers who'd been separated from their unit. The Brotherhood brought them to the inn and held a makeshift court in the common room. Lord Dondarrion sat in judgment, his scarred face impassive. The two soldiers knelt before him, hands bound, eyes wide with fear. "You're accused of burning villages and murdering Smallfolk," Dondarrion said. "What do you say?" "We were following orders," one of them pleaded. "Lord Tywin said to clear the riverlands. We did what we were told. You had a choice. You could have refused. You could have deserted like the man who joined us tonight. But you chose to kill innocents. That's not war. That's murder. Please. We have families, children. So did the people you killed." Dondarrion stood. "The Lord of Light has shown me the truth. You're guilty. The sentence is death." They hanged the soldiers from a tree behind the inn. Willow heard them begging and crying. She heard the ropes creak. She heard the sudden silence when it was over. She didn't watch. She'd seen enough death. The next morning, the Brotherhood left. They were heading deeper into the Riverlands, following rumours of more Lannister atrocities. Lord Dondarrion stopped at the door before mounting his horse. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said to Willow. "The hanging. I've seen worse. I know. We all have. That's the problem with war. It makes you see so much horror that you stop feeling it. You become numb. And when you're numb, you can do terrible things and call them justice. Is that what you're doing? Terrible things?" Dondarrion was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know any more. I used to be certain. I used to believe I was fighting for something noble. Now I'm just fighting because I don't know how to stop. Because if I stop, if I admit this is all meaningless, then everyone who died following me died for nothing. So I keep going, and I'll keep going, until I can't come back anymore." He rode away with his Brotherhood, leaving Willow alone at the crossroads once again. The bodies stayed in the tree for 3 days before she cut them down and buried them. She didn't know their names, didn't know if they'd really committed the crimes they'd been accused of. But she buried them anyway, because someone had to. The inn at the crossroads had become a place of judgment now, a place where the Brotherhood without banners brought their rough justice. And Willow, who just wanted to survive, was caught in the middle of it. She thought about Thoros's words, about things getting worse before they got better. She thought about Lord Dondarrion losing pieces of himself every time he died. And she thought about the two soldiers swinging from the tree, paying with their lives for following orders. Justice, revenge, murder. The lines between them were blurring, and Willow couldn't tell them apart anymore. All she knew was that the war was changing people, turning knights into outlaws, and priests into necromancers, and good men into executioners. And there was no end in sight. The Brotherhood would return. They always did. The crossroads was their anchor, the place they came back to between raids and battles. And Willow would be here, serving them food and ale, watching them transform from men into legends, into monsters. Because that's what survival meant now, watching the world burn and pouring drinks for whoever came through the door. Even if they had blood on their hands, even if justice looked like revenge, even if the heroes were starting to look like villains. She locked the door that night and stood at the window, watching the road. Somewhere out there, the Brotherhood was hunting. Somewhere else, the mountain was burning. And everywhere, people were dying. But the inn remained, a witness to it all. A repository of stories that no one would ever believe. Willow pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. She didn't pray. The gods weren't listening anymore, if they ever had been. She just hoped that when morning came, she'd still be alive to see it. That was all anyone could hope for now. The end came on a day that started like any other. Willow woke before dawn, as she always did now. The summer had been brief and false, more like a warm spring than a true season. Now autumn was settling in again, bringing with it the chill promise of another long winter. She dressed in the dark, her breath misting in the cold air of her small room. Downstairs, she built up the fire from last night's embers and started preparing breakfast. There were 4 guests staying at the inn, 2 traders heading south with a cart of wool, an old woman travelling to visit her daughter in some village Willow had never heard of, and a young man who claimed to be a merchant, but moved like a soldier and kept his hand near his knife even when he slept. She fried bacon and toasted bread over the fire. Simple food, but it was what she had. The inn's stores were running low. It was harder and harder to get supplies with the war still raging. Merchants who used to make regular runs up and down the kingsroad had stopped coming. The roads were too dangerous. Too many bandits and soldiers and desperate men willing to kill for a sack of grain. The Brotherhood came through less frequently now, too. Willow hadn't seen Lord Dondarrion in months. She'd heard rumours, though. Some said he was dead. Others said he'd died, and come back so many times that he was more ghost than man. There were stories of him appearing out of nowhere to hang Freys or Lannisters, then vanishing like smoke. The Smallfolk were starting to whisper that he was blessed by the gods, or cursed. No one seemed certain which. The traders came down for breakfast first. They ate quickly and nervously, eager to be back on the road. One of them kept glancing at the door, like he expected trouble to walk through it at any moment. "How far to King's Landing?" he asked Willow. 3 days' ride if the weather holds. Longer if it doesn't. The road safe? Willow almost laughed. Safe. Nothing was safe anymore. Safe enough if you travel in daylight and avoid anywhere that looks abandoned. Broken men hide in empty villages, and don't show coin to anyone you don't trust. Don't trust anyone at all, more like, the other trader muttered. They paid and left, their cart creaking down the southern road. Willow watched them go and wondered if they'd make it. Probably not. But that wasn't her concern. Her concern was keeping the inn running one more day. The old woman came down next. She was thin and frail, with hands that shook when she lifted her cup. Willow had given her the best room, the one that used to be her mother's. She felt sorry for the old woman, travelling alone at her age in these times. It was either very brave or very foolish. "Will you stay another night?" Willow asked. "No, child, I've already stayed too long. My daughter will be worried." "At least wait until midday. The mornings are when the bandits are most active." The old woman smiled sadly. "If the gods want me to reach my daughter, I will. If they don't, then I won't. Either way, delaying won't change it." She left an hour later, walking slowly up the northern road, leaning on a walking stick. Willow stood in the doorway and watched until she disappeared around the bend. She had a bad feeling about the old woman, but there was nothing she could do. You couldn't save everyone. Sometimes you couldn't save anyone. That left the young man who wasn't really a merchant. He came down as the old woman was leaving and watched her go with calculating eyes. "Foolish," he said, "travelling alone, unarmed. She'll be dead by nightfall." "Maybe," Willow said, "or maybe she'll be fine. You never know." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You've been here a long time, haven't you? Running this inn?" "My whole life." "And you're still alive? That takes skill. Or luck. Probably both." He paused. "You should leave. Soon. Things are going to get bad here." "Things are already bad." "Worse then. The Freys are moving. Lord Walder has made some kind of deal with the Lannisters. There's going to be fighting. Real fighting. And this Crossroads sits right in the middle of it." Willow's hands stilled on the cup she was wiping. "How do you know this?" "I hear things. I pay attention. That's how I've stayed alive." He stood and dropped coins on the table. More than the room cost. "Take my advice. Close the inn. Hide. Wait until the storm passes." "And if it never passes?" He shrugged. "Then we're all dead anyway. But at least you'll have tried." He left, heading east toward the Vale. Willow stood alone in the empty common room, his words echoing in her head. She should leave. She knew that. But where would she go? This inn was all she had. All she'd ever had. Without it, she was nothing. Just another refugee on the roads, waiting to die. So she stayed. She cleaned the rooms. She swept the floor. She prepared stew for whoever might come that evening. Normal things. Ordinary things. Things that made her feel like the world wasn't ending, even though it was. The soldiers came in the afternoon. Willow heard them before she saw them. The sound of many horses, the jingle of armor and weapons. She stepped outside and counted at least 30 riders, maybe more. They wore a mix of colours, lions of Lannister, the twin towers of Frey. Some badges she didn't recognise. Their leader was a Frey. She could tell by the ferrety look of him. Thin face, sharp nose, cold eyes. He had the look of a younger son, the kind who'd never inherit anything and resented it with every breath. He dismounted and approached the inn without asking permission. His men followed, spreading out across the yard like they owned it. "Food and drink," the Frey said. Not a request, a command. Willow nodded. "I'll need to prepare it. I wasn't expecting so many." "Then you should have been better prepared." "This is wartime. You never know who's coming." She went inside and started working. There wasn't enough food for 30 men, but she did what she could. She put on a large pot of stew, throwing in everything she had left. Carrots, onions, the last of the salted pork, some barley to stretch it further. It would be thin and tasteless, but it would be hot. The soldiers crowded into the common room and spilled out into the yard. They were loud and rough, tracking mud everywhere, knocking over benches, helping themselves to whatever they wanted. One of them went behind the bar and started opening casks of ale without asking. The Frey commander sat at the best table and put his muddy boots up on a chair. When Willow brought him a bowl of stew, he looked at it with disgust. "This is pig slop." "It's all I have." "Then you're not a very good innkeeper, are you?" Willow bit back her reply. Arguing with armed men was a good way to die. She just nodded and went back to the kitchen. She could hear them talking. They were celebrating something. Their voices were full of cruel laughter and satisfaction. She caught fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. The young wolf trapped at last. His mother will watch. Pay back the Starks for everything. Lord Walder is a genius. A trap. They were talking about a trap for Robb Stark, the king in the north, the boy who'd won every battle but was losing the war anyway, because wars weren't won by battles alone. Willow kept her head down and kept working. This wasn't her concern. Whatever the great lords did to each other was their business. She was just trying to survive. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The soldiers stayed for hours, eating and drinking everything she had. They didn't pay. When Willow mentioned payment, the Frey commander just laughed. Payment? We're fighting for the crown. The crown takes what it needs. Be grateful we're not taking more. As the sun set, they finally prepared to leave. Willow felt relief wash over her. They'd eaten her food and drunk her ale and left her with nothing. But at least they were going. At least the inn was still standing. Then one of the soldiers knocked over a candle. It happened so fast. The candle fell onto a pile of straw someone had tracked in from the stable. The straw caught immediately, flames leaping up bright and hungry. Willow ran for water, but the fire spread faster than she could move. It raced across the floor, catching on the old dry wood of the tables and benches. "Fire!" someone shouted. The soldiers panicked. They stampeded for the door, pushing and shoving, not caring who they trampled. Willow was knocked aside, hitting the wall hard enough to see stars. By the time she recovered, the common room was engulfed. She ran for the stairs. Her mother's things were up there, her father's sword, the few coins she'd managed to save, everything she owned in the world. But the stairs were already burning. Smoke filled the air, thick and black, choking her. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The heat was incredible, like standing next to the sun. Someone grabbed her from behind and dragged her towards the door. She fought, trying to get back to the stairs, but whoever had her was stronger. They pulled her outside and threw her down in the mud of the yard. Willow looked up through streaming eyes. The inn was fully ablaze now. Flames poured from every window. The roof was collapsing, sending up showers of sparks that lit the darkening sky like falling stars. Everything was burning. The soldiers were mounted and riding away, disappearing down the southern road. They didn't look back. They didn't care. It was just an inn. Just one more casualty of a war that had already claimed thousands. Willow crawled toward the burning building. She had to save something. Anything. But the heat pushed her back. She could feel her skin blistering from being too close. "Stay back, girl. There's nothing you can do." She turned and saw an old man. He was dressed in rags, his face weathered and scarred. One of the broken men who haunted the roads. He must have been sheltering nearby and come to see what the noise was about. "Everything," Willow said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "Everything I have is in there." "Everything you had," the old man corrected. "It's gone now." They stood together and watched the inn burn. Other people appeared, more broken men, a few refugees who'd been camping in the woods. They formed a rough circle around the fire, warming themselves on the destruction of Willow's life. The roof collapsed with a roar and a fountain of embers. The walls followed soon after, falling inward, consumed by flames. By midnight, there was nothing left but a smoking ruin of blackened stone and ash. Willow sat in the mud and stared at it. She didn't cry. She was too shocked for tears, too empty. She just sat there, watching the embers glow in the darkness, trying to understand that everything was gone. The old man sat down beside her. He offered her a piece of hard bread from a pouch at his belt. She took it mechanically and ate without tasting. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I don't know." "You could come with us. Safety in numbers." "Where are you going?" "Nowhere. Everywhere. We just keep moving. Stay ahead of the soldiers. Scavenge what we can. Survive. Willow looked at him. Really looked at him. He'd been someone once. Maybe a farmer or a craftsman. Maybe he'd had a family, a home, a life. Now he was nothing. Just another ghost haunting the roads. That's what she was now, too. Nothing. A ghost. "I'll stay here," she said. "There's nothing here." "Then I'll stay with nothing." The old man shrugged and stood. "Your choice. But when you change your mind, head west toward the river. Ask for the Brotherhood. They'll take you in. They take in everyone." He disappeared into the darkness with the others. Willow was alone again. Just her and the smoking ruins and the cold autumn night. She didn't sleep. She just sat there, watching the embers die, watching the first light of dawn creep over the eastern hills. When the sun rose, she could see the full extent of the destruction. The inn was gone, completely gone. Just foundation stones and ash and a few charred timbers pointing at the sky like accusing fingers. But she was still here. That thought kept repeating in her head. She was still here, still breathing, still alive. So she stood up. Her legs were stiff and her back ached and her clothes were ruined, but she stood up anyway. She walked to the well, drew water, and washed the ash from her face and hands. Then she started looking through the ruins. It took days, days of sifting through ash and debris, burning her hands on hot metal, breathing in smoke that made her cough until she tasted blood. But she found things. A few coins that had melted together, some cooking pots that were blackened but still usable, a knife with a burned handle, her father's sword, warped from the heat but still recognizable. She gathered everything in a pile. It wasn't much, but it was something. Other people came by, travelers who stopped at the crossroads expecting an inn and finding only ruins. Some of them had food or supplies. Willow traded her labor for whatever they could spare. She drew water for them. She gave them directions. She told them which roads were safest. Slowly, she began to rebuild. It wasn't a real inn, just a rough shelter made from salvaged timber and scavenged materials. 3 walls and a roof that leaked when it rained. A fire pit in the center. Some benches made from fallen logs. But it was hers. Word spread that there was still someone at the crossroads, that you could get water and directions and sometimes a hot meal if you had coin or goods to trade. Travelers started stopping again. Not many, but enough. Refugees told her what had happened, the thing the Frey soldiers had been celebrating, the trap they'd laid for Robb Stark. It had worked. The young wolf had gone to the twins to attend a wedding. Edmure Tully was marrying one of Lord Walder Frey's daughters. It was supposed to seal the alliance between the North and the Riverlands. Instead, it became a massacre. They called it the Red Wedding. During the feast, the Freys and their Lannister allies had turned on the Northern army. They killed Robb Stark. They killed his mother Catelyn. They killed his commanders and his personal guard. They killed anyone who carried a wolf on their banner. The North was broken. The war was over. The Lannisters had won. Willow listened to the stories and felt nothing. She was beyond feeling now. The war had taken everything from her, her mother, her home, her future. What was one more atrocity? But the refugees kept coming, and they all had stories. Stories of northern soldiers cut down while they slept. Stories of Catelyn Stark begging for her son's life. Stories of Robb's direwolf killed alongside him, sewn onto his body as a final mockery. One man told her something that made her remember. They threw the bodies in the river, he said. All of them. But Lady Catelyn, they left her for 3 days. When the Brotherhood found her, she was rotting, dead beyond any hope. But that Red Priest Thoros, he tried anyway. He gave her the kiss of life. And it worked. She came back. Willow looked up from the fire. Came back? Like Lord Dondarrion. Worse than Lord Dondarrion. She came back wrong. They say she doesn't speak. Just makes this sound in her throat where they cut her. They say she's not human anymore. Just rage and revenge, wearing a woman's shape. What happened to her? She leads the Brotherhood now. They're not about justice anymore. They just hang anyone wearing Frey or Lannister colours, hang them and leave them swinging from trees as warnings. They call her Lady Stoneheart. Stoneheart, the name fit, cold and hard and dead. Willow thought about Lady Catelyn as she'd seen her that night so long ago, tall and proud and desperate, so certain she was doing the right thing when she seized Tyrion Lannister, so sure that justice mattered. Now she was dead, or worse than dead. Another monster created by the war. More soldiers came through the Crossroads. These wore Frey colours openly now. They swaggered and laughed and acted like they'd won some great victory. Sometimes they stopped at Willow's rough shelter. Sometimes they demanded food and drink. She served them when she had to. She stayed silent and kept her eyes down and survived. But she noticed that the Frole soldiers never came back the same way they'd gone. They'd ride north full of confidence. Then weeks would pass, and if any of them returned south, there were always fewer. And those who did return looked haunted. The Brotherhood was hunting them. One night, a Frey soldier stopped at the shelter. He was alone, which was strange. His horse was lathered with sweat from hard riding. His hands shook when he reached for the water Willow offered. "How far to the Twins?" he asked. 2 days' ride north." "Are the roads clear?" Willow almost laughed. "No, the roads aren't clear. The Brotherhood is out there. They're hanging every Frey they find." The soldier's face went white. "I have to get home. I have to warn them. She's coming." Who? The dead woman. Lady Stoneheart. I saw her. I was with a patrol near Hag's Mire. She appeared out of nowhere with her outlaws. She pointed at my commander, and they dragged him down from his horse. They put a rope around his neck, and the whole time she just stood there, staring at him with these dead eyes. Not blinking, not moving, just watching him die. The soldier started crying. He begged. He said he wasn't at the wedding. He said he'd done nothing wrong, but she didn't care. She just watched him hang. Then she pointed at the next man, and the next. I only escaped because I ran. I ran, and I didn't stop. He left before dawn, riding north toward the false safety of the Twins. Willow never saw him again. She didn't know if he made it home. She didn't care. The war ground on. Winter came again, deeper and colder than before. Snow fell and covered the ruins of the inn, making them look almost peaceful, almost beautiful. Willow survived in her shelter, trading whatever she could for food and supplies. She'd become hard now, lean and weathered, like the broken men who roamed the roads. Sometimes she looked at her reflection in the water and barely recognized herself. The girl who'd served Lord Dondarrion breakfast was gone. The woman who'd stood with her mother in the kitchen was gone. Everyone she'd been before the war was ashes, just like the inn. All that remained was this. A woman at the crossroads, still pouring water, still giving directions, still surviving. The Brotherhood came through sometimes. They never bothered her. Maybe they remembered when she'd fed them and sheltered them. Maybe they just didn't care about one woman in a burned shelter. But she heard their voices in the night sometimes, heard them singing the old songs, heard the creak of rope and the choked sounds of men dying, justice, revenge, murder. She couldn't tell the difference anymore, and she'd stopped trying. The hanging tree grew fat with fruit that winter. It stood 100 yards north of the ruined inn, an old oak that had probably seen 1,000 travellers pass beneath its branches. Now it saw only death. Bodies swung from its limbs like grim ornaments, turning slowly in the cold wind. Freys mostly. Lannisters sometimes. Anyone the Brotherhood deemed guilty. Willow stopped counting after the first dozen. She was in her shelter one grey morning when she heard them coming. The Brotherhood moved differently now, quieter, more purposeful, like wolves on the hunt instead of men on a mission. She stepped outside and saw them emerging from the winter mist. There were more of them than before, maybe 40 or 50. A mix of outlaws and broken men and former soldiers who'd lost everything and had nothing left but revenge. They moved in a loose column, weapons ready, eyes scanning the trees and road for threats. And at their head rode a woman. Willow knew it was her before she saw the face. Lady Catelyn Stark, Lady Stoneheart, the woman who died at the Red Wedding and come back wrong. She rode a grey horse, sitting perfectly still in the saddle. She wore a grey cloak with a hood pulled up, but Willow could see her face in the shadow, or what was left of it. The right side was pale and bloated, the flesh of someone who'd been in water too long. The left side was worse, torn and ragged where they'd cut her throat. The wound was healed now, after a fashion, but it had healed badly. Scar tissue twisted across her neck like an obscene smile. And her eyes. Her eyes were empty, not sad or angry or anything human, just empty, like looking into a well with no bottom. The Brotherhood halted in the yard. No one dismounted. They just sat their horses and waited while Stoneheart looked at the ruins of the inn with those dead eyes. Thoros rode near the front. He was older now, his red robes faded to pink, his face lined with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. When he saw Willow, he nodded, but didn't smile. There was no warmth left in him. "Water," he said. His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting, or praying. "If you have any to spare." Willow brought buckets from the well. The men drank greedily, passing the water around. Some of them looked grateful. Others looked past her like she wasn't there. These were men who'd seen too much and done worse. Kindness meant nothing to them anymore. Stoneheart didn't drink. She just sat on her horse, staring at nothing. Or at everything. Willow couldn't tell. A commotion at the rear of the column drew her attention. Men were dragging someone forward. 3 people, actually. 2 men and a boy. They were bound with rope, their faces bloody, their clothes torn. Prisoners. They threw them down in the mud at Stoneheart's horse. The boy couldn't have been more than 14. He was crying, trying to be brave about it, and failing. One of the men was older, maybe 50, with grey in his beard. The other was young, perhaps 20, with a look of a soldier about him. "Found them on the kingsroad," one of the Brotherhood said. "The boy was running. These 2 were trying to get to Maiden Pool." Stoneheart looked down at them. She didn't speak. She couldn't speak, Willow realized. Her throat had been cut too deeply, but she made a sound, a wet, rasping question that seemed to come from somewhere other than her ruined throat. Thoros stepped forward. He'd become her voice, Willow understood, her interpreter. "Who are you?" he asked the prisoners. "Why were you running?" The older man spoke. His voice shook, but he met Stoneheart's eyes. "We're from Darry, servants in the castle. We left when the Lannisters came. We've done nothing wrong." "You served the Lannisters." "We had no choice. They took the castle. We had to serve whoever held it, or die." The young soldier spoke up. "I'm no servant. I was Frey garrison at the Twins, but I'm done with them, done with what they did. I'm trying to get to the free cities, start over." Stoneheart made another sound. Longer this time, more insistent. Thoros translated. "Were you at the wedding?" The soldier went white. "No, I swear it. I was on guard duty that night. I didn't know what they were planning. When I found out, I ran. Please, I had nothing to do with the Red Wedding." "But you serve House Frey." "I did. Not any more. I told you, I'm leaving. I want no part of the war." The boy was crying harder now. "Please, my lady, I'm just a kitchen boy. I never hurt anyone. I just want to go home." Stoneheart stared at them for a long moment. Then she raised one hand and pointed at the young soldier. The gesture was simple and final, judgment without words. "No!" the soldier screamed. "I didn't do anything. I wasn't there." The Brotherhood men grabbed him. He fought, but there were too many of them. They dragged him toward the hanging tree while he begged and pleaded and swore his innocence. Willow watched them throw a rope over a branch, the same branch they'd used for all the others. The rope was stained dark from previous use. "Please," the soldier was weeping now. "I have a sister, a mother. They need me, please." They put the noose around his neck. Stoneheart watched from her horse, motionless as a statue. The Brotherhood pulled the rope tight. "Wait," Thoros said. Everyone stopped. The soldier hung suspended between life and death, standing on his toes, the rope cutting into his throat, but not yet lifting him. Thoros walked to Stoneheart's horse. He spoke quietly, but Willow could hear. "My lady, he says he wasn't at the wedding. We have no proof he was." Stoneheart made a sound, sharp and dismissive. "He wore Frey colours," Thoros said, translating. "That's enough." "Is it? Is that who we are now? We hang men for the colours they wear." Another sound. This one was almost a hiss. "Justice requires judgment, you say, and you've judged him guilty. But, my lady, justice also requires mercy. Without mercy, we're just murderers, like the Freys, like the Lannisters, like everyone we claim to fight against." For a moment, Stoneheart just stared at Thoros, those empty eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Willow's skin crawl. Then she raised her hand again and made a chopping motion. The Brotherhood pulled the rope. The soldier's feet left the ground. He kicked and twisted, making horrible choking sounds. His face turned red, then purple. His eyes bulged. It took a long time, longer than Willow thought possible. She wanted to look away but couldn't. Some sick fascination kept her watching as the man died. Finally, he stopped moving. His body swung gently in the wind. Just another piece of fruit on the hanging tree. Thoros turned away. Willow saw his shoulders shaking. He was crying, she realized. The Red Priest who'd brought Lord Dondarrion back from death 6 times was crying over a Frey soldier. Stoneheart pointed at the older man next. "No," Thoros said. "My lady, please. He's just a servant. He served the Lannisters because he had to. That's not a crime." Stoneheart made her wet, rasping sound, insistent, demanding. "Serving them means supporting them, you say? and supporting them means guilt. But my lady, by that logic, every Smallfolk in the Riverlands is guilty. Everyone who gave the Lannisters food or shelter or labour did so because the alternative was death. You can't hang them all. Stoneheart's hand didn't waver. She pointed at the servant. The Brotherhood hesitated. They looked at each other, uncertain. Some of them seemed uncomfortable with this, but others, the harder ones, the ones who'd lost everything, they stepped forward to obey. "Stop," Thoros said. His voice was loud now, commanding. "I won't let you do this." The Brotherhood froze. Stoneheart turned her dead gaze on Thoros. The air seemed to grow colder. "You brought her back," one of the outlaws said to Thoros. "She leads us now, not you." "I brought her back because I thought the gods wanted it," Thoros said. "I thought she would bring justice to the Riverlands. But this isn't justice. This is just revenge. And revenge doesn't end. It just creates more bodies, more orphans, more broken men who'll join the next war and kill the next generation. It has to stop." Stoneheart made a sound, long and rattling and full of rage. Thoros shook his head. "I won't translate that. I won't be your voice any more if all you want is death." For a long moment, no one moved. The Brotherhood watched, waiting to see what would happen. Willow held her breath. Then Stoneheart lowered her hand. She made a dismissive gesture and turned her horse away from the prisoners. "Let them go," Thoros said quickly. "The servant and the boy. Let them go." The Brotherhood cut the ropes binding the two prisoners. They scrambled to their feet and ran. They didn't look back. They just ran north up the kingsroad and disappeared into the winter landscape. Stoneheart rode to the hanging tree. She looked up at the dead soldier swinging from the branch. Then she made a sound and pointed down the road. The Brotherhood mounted up. They were leaving. Moving on to find more Freys, more Lannisters, more people to hang. Thoros came to Willow before he left. He looked 10 years older than when she'd last seen him. His eyes were sunken. His hands trembled. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. "I've seen worse." "Have you?" "Sometimes I'm not sure anything is worse than this. Watching someone you try to save become a monster. Watching justice turn into vengeance. Watching good men become executioners." "Is she a monster?" Willow asked. "Or is she just what war makes of people?" Thoros was quiet for a moment. "Maybe there's no difference anymore. Maybe the war has made monsters of us all." He paused. "Lord Dondarrion is gone, you know. He died for the last time, gave his life to bring her back. I think he's the lucky one now. At least he doesn't have to see what we've become. What will you do? Follow her. Try to remind her of mercy when I can. Try to save who I can save. It's not much, but it's all I have left." He rode away with the Brotherhood, leaving Willow alone with the ruins and the hanging tree and the body swinging from its branches. She waited until they were gone. Then she got a knife and cut the soldier down. He was heavy, dead weight pulling on her arms as she lowered him to the ground. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd really been innocent or if he'd lied to save himself. But she buried him anyway. She dug the grave near the inn's foundation where her mother and father lay. The ground was hard with frost, and it took her most of the day. When it was done, she rolled the body in and covered it with earth. No prayers. She didn't know any. And even if she did, she wasn't sure the gods were listening. The Brotherhood came through the Crossroads more frequently after that, sometimes with Stoneheart, sometimes without her. but they always brought prisoners, and there were always hangings. Willow learned to recognize the pattern. They'd appear in the early morning or late evening, moving like ghosts. They'd drag their prisoners to the tree. They'd hold their rough trials. And then the ropes would go up, and the bodies would drop, and Stoneheart would watch with those empty eyes. Sometimes the prisoners were guilty of real crimes. Soldiers who'd participated in massacres, Freys who'd been at the Red Wedding, Lannisters who'd burned villages. Those hangings Willow could understand. They were monsters paying for monstrous acts. But other times, the guilt was less clear. A merchant who'd sold supplies to the Lannisters, a farmer who'd been forced to give food to Frey soldiers, a young man who'd worn the wrong colours at the wrong time. Those hangings were harder to watch. But Willow watched anyway. She felt like she owed it to them. Someone should witness. Someone should remember that these people had existed, had pleaded for their lives, had died afraid and alone. She started keeping account, scratching marks into a beam of her shelter. 1 mark for each body. 20 marks, 30, 40. The numbers climbed through the winter. Other travellers saw the hanging tree and learned to avoid the crossroads. The traffic slowed to a trickle. Just desperate people with nowhere else to go. Refugees fleeing one danger and running toward another. One such refugee was a girl, maybe 12 years old. She arrived alone, dressed in rags, half-starved and shivering with cold. Willow gave her food and water and asked where she was going. "Anywhere," the girl said. "Away from here, away from the wolves and the lions, away from all of it." "There is no away," Willow said gently. "The war is everywhere." "Then I'll walk until I find the edge of everywhere. There has to be somewhere safe. There has to be." She left the next morning, heading east towards the Vale. Willow watched her go, and hoped she'd find what she was looking for. But she doubted it. There was no safe place any more. The war had poisoned the whole realm. The Brotherhood came again the next week. This time they had 6 prisoners. All of them wore Frey colours. All of them were young, barely old enough to grow beards. Stoneheart pointed at the first one. "We weren't at the wedding," he screamed. "We're just garrison soldiers. We've never killed anyone." It didn't matter. The rope went up. The body dropped. One by one, they hanged all 6. Thoros didn't translate any more. He just sat on his horse, staring at nothing, while the Brotherhood did their work. When it was done, he looked at Willow. "How many now?" he asked. 47, Willow said. "That I've seen. Probably more that I haven't." 47. And how many of them were actually guilty? "I don't know. Maybe half. Maybe less." Thoros nodded slowly. "The gods forgive me. I brought her back. I gave her the power to do this. I thought I was saving a good woman. I didn't realize I was creating a killer." "Could you stop her?" Willow asked. "No. She's beyond my control now. Beyond anyone's control. She'll keep killing until there are no more Freys and Lannisters left. Or until someone kills her. And even then, I don't know if she'd stay dead. Some things, once you bring them back, they don't want to leave again." The Brotherhood rode away, leaving 6 more bodies swinging from the tree. Willow cut them down that evening. She'd stopped burying them individually. There were too many. Instead, she dug a mass grave near the tree. She rolled the bodies in and covered them with earth. A thought occurred to her as she worked. The inn had burned. Her mother was dead. Her old life was ashes. But she was still here at the crossroads, serving whoever came through. Only now, instead of serving food and ale, she was serving as a gravedigger, burying the victims of a war that would never end, counting bodies and cutting ropes and trying to give the dead some small dignity. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, she sat in her shelter and stared at the marks on the beam. 47 lives, 47 people who died at the Crossroads, judged by a dead woman who couldn't speak and wouldn't listen. She thought about Lady Catelyn as she'd been that first night, desperate and determined, so sure she was doing the right thing, so certain that seizing Tyrion Lannister would protect her family. And where had that certainty led? To the Red Wedding, to her own death and resurrection, to becoming a monster who couldn't tell justice from revenge. Maybe that was the real lesson of the war. Certainty was dangerous. The moment you were sure you were right, sure you were fighting for justice, that's when you became capable of anything, even becoming the thing you'd fought against. Willow lay down on her rough bed and closed her eyes. She didn't pray. She'd given up on prayers long ago. Instead, she just hoped that tomorrow would be better, that maybe the Brotherhood wouldn't come, that maybe the hanging tree would stay empty for one more day. It was a small hope, but it was all she had left. Outside, the wind picked up, making the rope creak on the hanging tree's empty branch. The sound was lonely and sad, like the world itself was mourning. And maybe it was. Maybe the whole realm was one giant graveyard now, and they were all just ghosts haunting it, pretending to be alive. Willow pulled her thin blanket tighter and waited for sleep. It was a long time coming. Spring came, but it brought no renewal. The snow melted and revealed a landscape of bones. Bodies the winter had hidden emerged from the thawing ground. Skeletons hung from trees, their ropes weathered and frayed. The land itself seemed exhausted, grey and lifeless, even as the world warmed. Willow had survived another winter. She wasn't sure how. By all rights, she should have frozen or starved. But somehow she kept going, eating what she could scavenge, trading labour for food, surviving one day at a time because there was nothing else to do. The traffic at the Crossroads had changed again. There were fewer soldiers now. The war was winding down, people said. Not ending, exactly. Just running out of energy like a fire that had consumed all the fuel. The great lords still fought, but with less conviction, like they'd forgotten what they were fighting for and were just going through the motions. What Willow saw mostly now were the broken. Deserters from all sides, men who'd abandoned their banners and their oaths and just wanted to disappear. Refugees who'd been fleeing so long they'd forgotten where they'd started from. Orphans, widows, the maimed and the mad. They came to the Crossroads because they had nowhere else to go. And Willow was there, still offering water from the well, still giving directions to people who had no destination. The Brotherhood came through less often now. When they did, they looked diminished. Fewer men, worse equipment. They still hanged people, but with less ceremony, less conviction. Like even they were tired of killing. Stoneheart still led them, still sat her horse with that terrible stillness, still pointed her dead finger at prisoners. But there were fewer prisoners now. The Freys had learned to avoid the Crossroads. The Lannisters sent soldiers in larger groups that the Brotherhood couldn't ambush. The hanging tree stood mostly empty these days. One morning, Willow was drawing water when a man stumbled up the kingsroad from the south. He was barely standing, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. His left leg was missing below the knee, the stump wrapped in dirty bandages. His face was gaunt, his eyes fevered. He collapsed at the edge of the yard. Willow ran to him and helped him sit up against the well. "Water," he gasped. She brought him water, and he drank desperately, spilling half of it down his chin. When he finished, he looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "King's Landing?" he asked. "South. 3 days if you were healthy. A week at the pace you're moving. Maybe never." He laughed bitterly. "Never sounds about right, but I have to try. Have to get home. Have to see if anything's left." "What happened to you?" "Battle of the Blackwater. I was there. Fought for Stannis. We almost won. Almost. Then the wildfire came, and the Tyrells, and everything went to hell." He looked down at his missing leg. "I got caught under a falling beam, trapped. The fire was coming. My friend cut me free. Cut through my leg to save the rest of me. I don't even know if he made it out." "You fought for Stannis?" "For a while. Don't know what I fight for anymore. Don't know if anyone does." He paused. "You got any food? I'll trade you for it. I've got this." He pulled out a dagger from his belt. It was good steel, well made, with a pommel shaped like a stag's head. Worth more than a few meals. Willow shook her head. "Keep your dagger. You might need it. I'll give you food anyway." She brought him bread and the last of yesterday's stew. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. When he finished, he looked at her with something like gratitude. "Why help me? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be a deserter, a criminal." "I don't care what you are," Willow said. "Everyone who comes through here is broken somehow. Might as well help when I can." He stayed 3 days, sleeping in the shelter, recovering what strength he could. During that time, others arrived. More broken men. A woman who'd lost her mind and spoke only to people who weren't there. A boy who'd been a soldier, but couldn't have been more than 13, with scars on his arms from battles he was too young to fight. They gathered at the crossroads, like driftwood washing up on a shore. Lost pieces of lives destroyed by the war. On the 3rd evening, they sat around Willow's fire pit, sharing what little food they had. The one-legged soldier, whose name was Lem, told stories about the battles he'd fought. The young boy, who never gave his name, sat silently and stared at the flames. The mad woman sang songs that made no sense. "You ever think about what we're all doing?" Lem asked. "Running, hiding, surviving. For what? So we can keep running and hiding and surviving." "What else is there?" Willow asked. "I don't know. Something more than this. There has to be. Maybe there used to be, before the war. Was there? I can't even remember anymore. Feels like the war has always been here. Like it's the natural state of things, and peace was just a dream we had once." The boy spoke suddenly, his voice rough from disuse. "My father said the gods would punish the kings for what they did, for all the innocent people who died. He said justice would come." "Your father was wrong," Lem said. "There is no justice, just power. And the people with power do whatever they want, and the rest of us suffer for it." "The Brotherhood," the boy said. "They bring justice." Willow laughed. It was a harsh sound, bitter. "You think what the Brotherhood does is justice. They hang people for wearing the wrong colours. They hang children. They've become what they fought against. But Lady Stoneheart is dead. She died at the Red Wedding. What walks around wearing her face is something else, something that only knows how to kill." The boy looked like she'd struck him. He'd probably been holding on to some belief that the Brotherhood was righteous, that they were heroes. Taking that from him was cruel. But Willow was beyond caring about cruelty. Let him learn the truth now, while he was still young enough to run. They left in the morning, all of them. Lem heading south toward a home that probably didn't exist anymore. The boy going north for reasons he didn't explain. The madwoman wandering east, following some voice only she could hear. Willow stood alone at the crossroads again. More people came, more broken men and ruined lives. Some stayed a day, some stayed an hour. They all brought stories of the war's aftermath. King's Landing was starving. The fighting had disrupted the harvests. The roads were too dangerous for merchants. People were eating rats and boot leather. The north was a wasteland. The Boltons held Winterfell now, and they ruled through terror. They flayed people alive and hung the skins from the castle walls. The Riverlords were broken. The Freys controlled the Twins and the Crossing, taxing anyone who wanted to cross the river. Their prices were so high that some people tried to swim and drowned. The Vale had closed its gates. They wanted nothing to do with the war. Let the rest of the realm tear itself apart. They'd sit in their mountains and wait. Dawn was plotting something. Everyone knew it, but no one knew what. And everywhere, in every region, there were broken men. Former soldiers who'd lost their cause. Farmers who'd lost their land. Families who'd lost everything. They roamed the roads, dangerous and desperate, preying on anyone weaker than themselves. The realm was eating itself. One afternoon, 3 riders appeared on the western road. They wore good armor, carried fine weapons, but their clothes were stained and worn. Hedge knights, probably, or some deserters from some lord's army. They stopped at the crossroads and looked at Willow's shelter with calculating eyes. "Food?" the leader asked. He was a big man with a scar across his nose. "Some, not much. We'll take what you have." It wasn't a request. Willow's hand moved toward the knife she kept in her belt, her father's knife, salvaged from the ruins. "I can give you bread and water, nothing else." The leader smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "We'll take the bread and water, and your money, and anything else worth taking." They dismounted. The other 2 spread out, flanking her. This was it, Willow realized. After everything she'd survived, she was going to die here. Killed by some nameless hedge knights for a few loaves of bread. Then a voice spoke from the tree line. "I wouldn't do that." The hedge knights spun around. A man stepped out from the shadows under the trees. He was thin and scarred, dressed in leathers, with a bow in his hands and an arrow already nocked. Behind him, more men appeared. 10 of them, 20, all armed, all watching the hedge knights with hard eyes. Willow recognized some of them, Brotherhood men, but they didn't wear the lightning bolt sigil anymore. They looked like common outlaws now. The thin man with the bow was someone Willow knew, one of Dondarrion's original company. He'd been at the inn that first morning, all those years ago. She couldn't remember his name. "This crossroads is protected," the thin man said. "The woman here has shown kindness to travelers. We don't let people hurt those who show kindness. Now you can ride away, or you can join the others in the ground. Your choice." The hedge knights looked at each other, then at the armed men surrounding them, then at Willow. The leader spat in the dirt. "Keep your bread, woman. It's not worth dying for." They mounted and rode south, fast, not looking back. The thin man lowered his bow. "You all right?" Willow nodded. She was shaking, but tried not to show it. "You should leave here," he said. "It's not safe. Too many desperate men on the roads." "I have nowhere to go." "None of us do. That's why we keep moving." He paused. "We're not the Brotherhood anymore. Not really. Lady Stoneheart took most of the men east. She's hunting the last of the Freys. The rest of us, we just wander. Try to help where we can. Try to stay alive." "Where's Thoros?" "Gone. He tried to make her stop the killing. She wouldn't. So he left. Last I heard, he was in the Riverlands somewhere, drinking and trying to forget everything. Can't say I blame him." The men started melting back into the trees. The thin man turned to follow them. "Wait," Willow said. "What's your name? You came here once, years ago, with Lord Dondarrion, before everything went wrong." He smiled sadly. "Angai. I was an archer in Lord Dondarrion's company. Feels like a lifetime ago. Like a different person lived that life." "What happened to us, Angai? How did it all go so wrong?" "The war happened. It eats everything. Turns heroes into monsters and good intentions into nightmares. We thought we could fight it. We thought we could make things better. But you can't fight a war without becoming part of it. And once you're part of it, it changes you. Until you can't remember who you used to be." He disappeared into the trees with his men. Willow stood alone in the fading light. That night, she thought about what Angai had said, about being changed, about not remembering who you used to be. She looked at her hands, rough and scarred, the hands of someone who dug too many graves. She touched her face and felt the lines carved there by hunger and grief and years of surviving. Who was she now? Not the girl who'd served Lord Dondarrion breakfast. Not the daughter who'd buried her mother. Not even the woman who'd watched the inn burn. She was whoever the war had left behind. A witness, a survivor, a gravedigger at the crossroads. Nothing more, nothing less. And tomorrow, more broken people would come, more stories, more suffering, and she'd still be here, offering water from the well because it was all she knew how to do. The war would end eventually. All wars did, but Willow wondered if any of them would still be human when it finally did. The inn was never rebuilt. Years passed, though Willow stopped counting them. Seasons blurred together. Winters came and went. Springs promised renewal and delivered only more of the same. The war officially ended, people said, but no one could point to the exact moment when it stopped. It just faded, like a fever breaking, leaving the realm weak and hollow. The crossroads remained. The three roads still met like the fingers of a buried giant's hand. But everything else had changed. Willow's shelter had been expanded over the years. Travellers sometimes left materials, a few planks of wood, some stones. She'd built walls, repaired the roof, added a second room. It wasn't an inn. It would never be an inn again. But it was more than the rough structure it had started as. She was older now. How much older, she wasn't certain. Her hair had grey in it. Her hands were permanently gnarled from work and cold. Her face was lean and weathered, carved by years of hard living into something that looked older than her actual age. But she was still here, still at the crossroads, still offering water to whoever passed through. The traffic had changed again. There were more travellers now than during the worst of the war. But they were different. Merchants were returning to the roads, though cautiously. Fewer soldiers, more common folk trying to rebuild their lives. And the stories they brought were of a realm trying to remember what peace looked like. King Tommen sat the Iron Throne now, a boy even younger than Joffrey had been. People said he was kind, gentle, that he loved his kittens and wanted everyone to be happy. It would have been touching if it weren't so useless. The realm didn't need kindness, it needed healing, and no one knew how to heal wounds this deep. In the north, the Boltons ruled Winterfell. Rose Bolton, who'd betrayed Robb Stark at the Red Wedding, held the castle now. His bastard son Ramsay was even crueler than his father. The stories that came down from the north made even the Brotherhood's hangings seem merciful. The riverlands were broken, fields lay fallow, villages stood empty. The population had been decimated by years of fighting. Those who'd survived were scattered, trying to rebuild from nothing. The Brotherhood without banners still existed, but they were legends now more than reality. Stories told around fires. Some said Lady Stoneheart still hunted Freys. Others said she'd finally died for good. No one knew for certain. Willow didn't care. She'd stopped following the stories of great lords and their wars. They belonged to a world she was no longer part of. One autumn morning, a rider appeared on the southern road. He was alone, which was unusual. Most travellers moved in groups now for safety. But this man rode like he feared nothing. As he got closer, Willow saw why. He was huge. Not tall like a normal big man, but truly massive. 7 feet at least, with shoulders like a bull and hands that could crush a man's skull. He wore good armour, well maintained, and carried a great sword across his back that would have taken 3 normal men to lift. He stopped at the yard and dismounted. When his feet hit the ground, Willow felt the impact. "Water," he said. His voice was deep and rough. Willow drew water from the well and brought it to him. She had to crane her neck to look at his face. What she saw there made her stomach turn. His eyes were wrong, dead, like a fish 3 days old. And there was something else wrong with him. The way he moved was stiff, mechanical, like a puppet on strings, like he wasn't quite alive. He drank the entire bucket without stopping. Then he looked down at her. The twins. Which road? Willow pointed north. 2 days' ride. Follow the kingsroad until you reach the Green Fork. The castle sits astride the river. He nodded slowly. Then he mounted his horse and rode north without another word. Willow watched him go. Something about him had terrified her in a way that years of war and violence hadn't. He wasn't human. Not anymore. He was something else. Something wrong. Later that day, an old woman came from the east. She was leading a donkey loaded with pots and pans. A tinker, travelling the roads, selling her wares. She stopped at Willow's shelter, and they traded. Willow gave her bread and vegetables. The tinker gave her a new pot to replace one that had cracked. While they worked, Willow asked about the giant man. The tinker's face went pale. "You saw him? Sir Robert Strong, they call him. Queen Cersei's champion. They say he's the biggest man in the 7 kingdoms. They say he never eats, never sleeps, never speaks, except to give directions or take orders. What is he? Something that shouldn't exist. There are rumours. They say Qyburn, the Queen's maester, made him. Brought him back from death, or made him from pieces of dead men, or worked some dark magic that the Citadel forbids. No one knows for certain, but everyone who sees him knows he's wrong." The tinker left, heading west. Willow stood at the crossroads and thought about what she'd said, brought back from death, like Dondarrion, like Stoneheart. The war had broken the natural order of things. Death didn't mean death anymore. The line between living and dead had blurred until no one could tell the difference. More time passed. The seasons turned. Willow grew older. She'd become a fixture at the Crossroads, a landmark. Travellers told each other about the woman who lived in the ruins of the inn. Some said she was mad. Others said she was wise. A few claimed she was a witch who could tell the future. Willow was none of those things. She was just a woman who'd survived, who kept surviving because she didn't know how to do anything else. One winter evening, 3 people arrived together: a man, a woman, and a young girl. They looked exhausted, half frozen, dressed in rags. Refugees, though from where and from what, Willow didn't ask. She gave them shelter and what food she had. They huddled around her fire, warming themselves, not speaking much. Finally, the man spoke. "How long have you been here?" "All my life," Willow said. "My mother kept the inn before the war, before it burned." "That was your inn? The one where Lady Catelyn Stark sees Tyrion Lannister?" Willow felt something shift in her chest. "You know about that?" "Everyone knows about it. It's in the songs now. The start of the War of 5 Kings. The moment everything went wrong." Songs. They'd made songs about that night. About Lady Catelyn and Tyrion and the choice that had set the realm on fire. They'd turned it into entertainment. A story to sing about. "It wasn't like the songs," Willow said quietly. "It was just people making choices. They thought they were doing the right thing. They were wrong, and thousands died because of it." The woman spoke. "My husband died in that war, at the Red Wedding. He was a northern soldier, loyal to Robb Stark. They killed him while he slept." "I'm sorry," Willow said. "Everyone's sorry. But sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't feed our daughter. Sorry doesn't undo what they did." "No, it doesn't." They sat in silence for a while. Then the little girl spoke. "Are the wars over now?" Willow looked at the child. She couldn't have been more than 8. She'd probably spent her entire life running from one war or another. "Yes," Willow lied. "The wars are over." "Will there be more wars?" Willow wanted to lie again, to tell the child that peace would last forever, that she'd grow up safe and happy. But she couldn't. "I don't know," she said instead. "Maybe. There are always wars. Someone always wants something that belongs to someone else, and they're always willing to kill for it." "That's stupid," the girl said. "Yes, it is." The family stayed 2 days, then moved on, heading south toward the Reach, where they'd heard there was food and work. Willow watched them go and hoped they'd find what they were looking for, but she doubted it. Spring came again. With it came new soldiers. Not the broken deserters of previous years, but organized men in good equipment. They wore the flayed man of House Bolton, and they moved with purpose. They stopped at the Crossroads and demanded food. Willow had learned long ago not to refuse armed men. She gave them what she had. Their sergeant was a hard man with scars on his face. He looked around at the ruins of the inn, at Willow's rough shelter, at the hanging tree that still stood in the distance. "You've been here a long time," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. You've seen things. You know things." "I see travellers. I know nothing." He smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Don't play stupid with me, old woman. You hear things. The Brotherhood. Where are they?" "I haven't seen them in years." "Liar. They were here last month. They hanged 2 of our men and left them swinging from that tree." Willow said nothing. It was true. She'd cut down 2 Bolton soldiers a few weeks ago and buried them with all the others. But she wouldn't tell this man that. "If you see them," the sergeant said, "you send word to Winterfell. Lord Ramsay wants them found, all of them, especially the dead woman. He wants to give her a proper death, one that sticks." They left, heading north. Willow stood in their dust and felt nothing. She'd stopped feeling fear or anger or anything much. She was numb now, worn smooth by years of seeing the same violence play out over and over with different faces. More seasons, more travellers, more stories. A merchant told her that Daenerys Targaryen, the last of the Dragon Lords, was conquering cities across the narrow sea. That she had 3 dragons and an army of former slaves. That she might come to Westeros and reclaim the Iron Throne. A Septon told her that the Faith Militant had been restored, that the Sparrows, the poor holy men, were rising up to challenge the crown, that there would be trials, judgments, a reckoning for all the sins of the great lords. A deserter told her that the White Walkers were real, that they were coming from beyond the wall, that an army of the dead marched south, and no one was ready. Willow listened to all of it and believed none of it. She'd heard too many stories, too many prophecies, too many promises of salvation or doom. They all blurred together into meaningless noise. The only truth she knew was this: the crossroads remained, the roads met, and people kept passing through, carrying their pain and their stories and their desperate hopes that somewhere down the road things would be better. One evening, in the last light of a fading autumn day, Willow stood at the well and looked at the 3 roads, north to Winterfell and the Wall, south to King's Landing and the warm kingdoms beyond, east to the Vale and the mountains of the Moon. How many people had she seen walk these roads? Thousands, tens of thousands. How many of them were dead now? How many had found what they were looking for? How many had just kept walking until they couldn't walk any more? She thought about her mother, buried behind the shelter, her father, lying beside her, all the nameless soldiers and refugees she'd buried over the years. The ground here was full of the dead. The crossroads had become a graveyard. But it was also something else, a waypoint, a place where people stopped between one disaster and the next, a place where they could rest, drink water, gather their strength before continuing on. That was worth something, wasn't it? Even if she couldn't stop the wars, or heal the wounds, or bring back the dead. Even if all she could do was offer water from a well and a place to rest. That was something, wasn't it? Willow wasn't sure any more. She went back to her shelter as darkness fell. Inside, she lit a candle and sat on her rough bed. On the wall, she'd been keeping her count. Scratches in the wood. One for each body she'd cut down from the hanging tree, one for each person she'd buried. She'd stopped counting at 200. There were more after that, many more. But she'd stopped marking them. There were only so many marks you could make before they stopped meaning anything. She lay down and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, more travellers would come, more soldiers or refugees, or broken men looking for something they'd lost, and she'd be here, offering what little she could offer. Because that's what you did. You survived. You helped who you could help. You kept going because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant the war had won completely. Outside, the wind picked up. It made a sound like voices, like all the ghosts of all the people who'd passed through the crossroads over the years, calling to each other, telling their stories to anyone who'd listen. Willow listened. She'd become good at listening. It was all she had left. The wars would continue. New kings would rise and fall. New battles would be fought. New atrocities would be committed. The great lords would keep playing their Game of Thrones, and the small folk would keep dying for it. But the Crossroads would remain. The three roads would still meet, and Willow would still be here, a witness to it all, pouring water for ghosts and remembering that once, long ago, this place had been more than ruins and graves. It had been an inn, a place of warmth and safety, a place where travelers could rest and feel human for a while. Maybe someday it would be again. Probably not, but maybe. And that small, fragile maybe was enough to keep her going one more day, one more season, one more year, for as long as she could. The candle burned low. The wind whispered its ghost stories, and Willow, the innkeeper's daughter who'd survived everything the war could throw at her, closed her eyes and waited for morning. Because morning always came, even after the longest, darkest nights. Morning always came.